Before we dive in, I'd love to hear from you. Have you ever kept a secret so big it shaped your entire life? Yes or no? Drop it in the comments. I read more of them than you might think. Just a quick note. Some details in this story are fictionalized for storytelling. What matters most is the message it carries. Some fathers hide money under mattresses. I hide mine inside 22 buildings scattered across Chicago's South Side. I woke at 6 that Monday morning, same as every morning for the past 30 years. The January cold had crept through the single-pane windows of my Pilsen apartment, frosting the edges where the caulk had long since cracked. I am Vernon Caldwell, 67 years old, and if you saw me standing in my cramped kitchen wearing this threadbare corduroy jacket, you would see exactly what everyone else sees. A retired taxi driver scraping by on a fixed income, heating instant coffee in a microwave older than my marriage. You would be wrong. I walked to the bedroom closet, past the dresser my late wife Eleanor picked out in 1987, and reached behind the sock drawer. The false back panel came loose with a familiar click. Behind it sat a notebook, leather-bound, edges soft from decades of handling. I carried it to the kitchen table and opened it to the first page. 22 addresses, each one a rental property across the South Side and beyond. Each one purchased quietly through my holding company, Meridian Holdings, LLC, a name that appears on leases and tax forms, but never in conversations with my son. I ran my finger down the list, lips moving silently as I calculated what I already knew by heart. Average value per property, $290,000. Total portfolio, $6.4 million. You want to know what $6.4 million looks like when you are hiding it? It looks like instant coffee and a 19-year-old Crown Victoria parked on the street because you cannot afford a garage. It looks like a jacket with a coffee stain on the sleeve that you never bothered to replace, because replacing it would mean explaining where the money came from. I closed the notebook and pressed my palm flat against the cover. 30 years of silence, 30 years of watching my son Drake grow up believing his father was a simple man with simple means. He finished college thinking he had done it himself, working those campus jobs, taking those loans. He never knew I paid off his balance 3 days after graduation, routing the payment through a scholarship fund that existed only on paper. That is the thing about secrets kept this long. You start believing them yourself. By 2 in the afternoon, I was behind the wheel of the Crown Vic, running my usual route through the North Side. The taxi medallion had expired years ago, but I kept the car because it gave me reasons to drive, reasons to watch, reasons to pass by my properties without anyone asking why. I turned onto North Clark Street and slowed near a building I knew better than most. 4457 North Clark. Red brick, 3 stories, good bones. I had purchased it in 2019 for $215,000, renovated the commercial space on the ground floor myself. The unit had been vacant for 8 months. Not anymore. A banner stretched across the windows, fresh vinyl catching the winter light. Coming soon. Caldwell and Mercer Real Estate, opening February 2026. I pulled to the curb and killed the engine. Caldwell and Mercer. My 29-year-old son Drake and his fiancée Soleil launching their own firm. I had heard about their plans through the usual channels. Bernard Thornton, my oldest friend and the only person alive who knew the full scope of what I had built. Bernard had mentioned they were looking for office space. He had not mentioned they had found it. Let me tell you something about secrets kept for 30 years. They do not get lighter. They just get quieter. And in that quiet, you start to forget why you are keeping them at all. I stared at the sign until the winter sun hit the glass just right, turning the letters gold. My name on his sign. My building under his feet. My son was about to build his entire future inside a space he did not know I owned, paying rent to a company he had never heard of, standing on a foundation I had poured in silence while he was still learning to walk. And there it was, my name on his ambition, my empire beneath his dreams, my heart caught somewhere between pride and dread. I could call him right now. Pick up the phone, say the words. "Drake, there is something I need to tell you." But then what? Would he see the years of sacrifice, the careful planning, the love that had stayed hidden because I wanted him to earn his own way? Or would he only see the money, the deception, the father who had watched him struggle when struggle was never necessary? I had asked myself that question 1,000 times. I still did not have an answer, so I started the engine and pulled back into traffic. Same route, same silence, same question I had carried for 3 decades. My son was about to build his entire future on borrowed ground, and I had not decided yet whether to tell him or let him learn the hard way what it means to stand on a foundation someone else poured. But that evening, a phone call would change everything. 3 hours after I saw my name on that sign, a different kind of reckoning found me in a fluorescent-lit exam room. The call had come while I was still parked on North Clark Street, staring at my son's future through a frosted windshield. A nurse from Pilsen Community Health Center, reminding me that Dr. Prescott had my test results and needed to see me before the end of the day. Something in her voice told me this was not the kind of appointment you reschedule. Dr. Jolene Prescott had been my physician for 15 years. At 52, with silver-streaked hair pulled back tight, and a clipboard she held like a shield, she had seen me through a kidney stone, a case of pneumonia that nearly put me in the hospital, and the quiet grief that followed Eleanor's passing. She knew me well enough to skip small talk. "Vernon," she said, settling onto the stool across from me, "your EKG shows irregularities I don't like." The exam room smelled of antiseptic and something faintly metallic like old coins. I watched her flip through papers, her eyes scanning lines I could not read from where I sat. Irregular heartbeat. Possible arrhythmia. She looked up. "We need a stress test and an echocardiogram within 2 weeks. Sooner if you experience any chest pain, shortness of breath, or dizziness." You ever notice how doctors pause before bad news? That half-second where their eyes go soft, like they are already sorry for what they are about to say? Dr. Prescott had that pause down to an art. "Do you have family nearby?" she asked. "Someone who should know about this?" I thought about the notebook in my closet. I thought about the buildings scattered across the city, the decades of careful silence, the fortune no one knew I had built. And I thought about my son, whose name now hung on a sign outside one of those buildings, who had not called me in 3 weeks, who would learn everything eventually, whether I told him or not. "I have a son," I said. "Good." She wrote something on her clipboard. "Bring him to the follow-up if you can. These conversations are easier with support." I nodded, though I was not sure which conversation she meant, the one about my heart or the one I had been avoiding for 30 years. By 7 that evening, I was back in the apartment, the January cold pressing against the windows like it wanted in. I picked up my phone and dialed Drake's number. It rang 4 times, then went to voicemail. "Drake, it's Dad. Call me when you get this. Something I need to talk to you about." I hung up and set the phone on the kitchen table, watching it like it might ring back any second. It did not. At 8:30, I called again. "Son, it's me again. Nothing urgent, just call me back, would you?" The phone felt heavier each time I picked it up. Not from weight, but from the silence it kept handing back to me. 9:15, a third call. "Drake, I know you're busy with the new office. Just give me 5 minutes when you can." Outside, the snow had started falling, fat flakes drifting past the streetlight in slow spirals. I watched them land on the Crown Vic's windshield and disappear into the cold glass. 10:45, one more try. "It's Dad, again. I'm going to bed, but I'd like to hear from you when you have a chance." Let me tell you what 4 unanswered calls feel like when you are 67 and just learned your heart might quit. It feels like standing at a door that used to open. You knock and knock and knock, and the silence on the other side is not empty. It is full of all the things you cannot see, all the reasons someone might choose not to answer. I sat in the dark with the phone in my lap, the only light coming from the street lamp outside, turning the falling snow orange against the black sky. My chest did not hurt. My breathing was fine. But something else ached. Something the doctor could not measure with electrodes and graphs. 4 calls, 4 voicemails. 4 times I heard my own voice pretending everything was fine when nothing was. I had spent 30 years protecting my son from the burden of my money. I had let him believe I was poor so he would build his own life, earn his own way, become his own man. And now, sitting in this dark apartment with snow piling up outside and a phone that refused to ring, I wondered if I had protected him so well that he had forgotten I existed. By 11, the snow had buried my windshield and my phone had not made a sound. I sat watching the flakes fall, and I realized something that scared me more than any heart condition. My son was not busy. He was not in a meeting or stuck in traffic or away from his phone. He was choosing not to answer, and I had no idea why. The second day of silence would bring more questions, and the first clue that I was not the only one keeping secrets. The second morning of silence hit different. Not panic anymore, but something colder settling into my chest like the January frost on my windshield. I woke before dawn, checked my phone before my feet touched the floor. No missed calls, no texts, just the same black screen that had stared back at me all night. I made coffee I did not taste and sat at the kitchen table watching the sky lighten over Pilsen, telling myself there had to be an explanation. By 8, I was behind the wheel, running fares and running excuses. Drake was busy. The office launch was consuming every waking hour. He would call when things settled down. I believed this less with each passing mile. Between a fare to O'Hare and a pickup in Wicker Park, I called him again. Voicemail. Drake, it's Dad, just checking in. The office launch must be keeping you busy. Call when you can. I hung up and stared at the traffic ahead, my grip tightening on the wheel. That made 9 calls since Monday. 9 times his recorded voice told me he was unavailable. 9 times I pretended that word meant anything other than what it really meant. You know what 48 hours of silence sounds like? It sounds like every worst-case scenario you have ever imagined taking turns whispering in your ear. Is he hurt? Is he angry? Does he know something I think he doesn't? The questions circled like vultures, patient and relentless, waiting for my certainty to die so they could pick the bones. By 5 in the afternoon, I had called 3 more times. 12 voicemails now, each one a little more hollow than the last. I pulled the taxi into my spot on 18th Street and sat there, engine off, watching the cold creep across the windshield. 48 hours. Not a text. Not a missed call returned. Not even a quick, busy, talk later that would have told me he was alive and thinking of me. This was not busy. This was something else. I drove to Oak Park that evening, same as every Tuesday for the past 20 years. Bernard Thornton lived in a brownstone that smelled like old books and better decisions, the kind of place where problems got solved over whiskey and wooden chess pieces. Bernard was 69 years old, a retired real estate attorney with reading glasses perpetually perched on his forehead like he might need them at any moment. He had helped me structure Meridian Holdings 3 decades ago, had watched me build my portfolio one quiet purchase at a time, and had kept my secret with the kind of loyalty you cannot buy. He was the only person alive who knew the full scope of what I had built. He took one look at me and frowned. "You look like hell, Vern. What's eating you?" I settled into my usual chair, the leather worn soft from years of Tuesday evenings. The chessboard sat between us, pieces already arranged, but neither of us reached for them. "Drake hasn't answered in 2 days," I said. "Not one call. Something's wrong." Bernard leaned back, his chair creaking. "You try stopping by?" "Sometimes the direct approach beats the phone." I thought about it, but showing up uninvited, I shook my head. If he's avoiding me, I'd rather know why first. And if he's just busy, then why not send a text? 2 words, "I'm fine. That's all I need." Bernard was quiet for a moment, studying me over his reading glasses. He had known me long enough to hear what I was not saying. "There's something else," he said. It was not a question. "I saw the doctor Monday. My heart." I touched my chest without meaning to. "Irregular. They want tests." He nodded slowly, absorbing this. "Does Drake know?" "I've been trying to tell him. 12 voicemails, not one callback. Pay attention here, because this is where the threads start weaving together, even if we could not see the pattern yet." Bernard reached for his whiskey, took a slow sip, and set it down. "Funny you mention real estate," he said. "I've been reviewing a loan file all week. Some new brokerage startup looking for commercial financing. The name sounded familiar, but I couldn't place it." I watched him turn his glass, his brow furrowing in that way it did when he was chasing a half-formed thought. $850,000, he continued. "Aggressive ask for a new firm, but they've got a decent lease lined up. Office space in Lincoln Park." My stomach tightened. Lincoln Park. The sign I had seen Monday. My building. Bernard reached for his bishop, then stopped. His hand hovered over the piece as something clicked behind his eyes. "Caldwell and Mercer," he said slowly, like the name was a stone he was turning over. "That's the company on the loan file. Caldwell." He looked up at me, and I watched the first flicker of connection cross his face. "Vernon, isn't your son's name Drake Caldwell?" The question hung in the air between us, heavy as the silence that had followed me all week. Tomorrow Bernard would pull the full file, and we would discover exactly how deep my son's dependence on Meridian Holdings ran. Bernard did not answer my question. He just walked to his filing cabinet and pulled out a manila folder thick enough to hold a man's entire future. "I brought it home to review," he said, settling back into his chair and spreading the papers across his desk. "Wanted a second look before the committee meeting Friday." I leaned forward, scanning the documents upside down. Letterheads, financial projections, a business plan with my son's name at the top, and there on the third page a number that made my chest tighten. $850,000, Bernard said, tapping the figure with his pen. "Startup capital request. Office lease collateral through a holding company." He paused, his eyes meeting mine over the top of his glasses. "Meridian Holdings, Vernon. Your LLC is listed as the indirect guarantor." I sat back, the leather chair suddenly feeling like a trap. "He doesn't know," I said. Bernard shook his head. "The paperwork is structured through 3 layers of corporate entities. Your name appears nowhere a casual reader would find it, but the collateral chain leads back to you. $850,000. That is how much my son owed me without knowing my name was anywhere on the paper. His entire business, the office, the furniture, the marketing budget, the salaries he would pay, all of it flowed through accounts I controlled. Every dollar he borrowed to build his dream passed through my hands first. "The building on North Clark," Bernard continued. "The lease terms are generous, below market rate. Someone at Meridian Holdings approved those terms 6 months ago." "That was me," I said quietly. "I didn't know who the tenant was. The property manager handled the application." Bernard set down his pen and looked at me the way he looked at complicated contracts, searching for the clause that would unravel everything. "You understand what this means," he said. "If this loan goes through, Drake's entire operation depends on your foundation. And if you ever decide to pull that foundation out from under him, I wouldn't. I know you wouldn't, but you could." He let that settle between us. "The question is, what are you going to do with that information?" I had no answer. Not that night, not the next morning. By Wednesday evening, I was back in my apartment, the loan documents photocopied and sitting on my kitchen table next to my phone. 14 calls now, 14 voicemails. 3 days of silence that felt longer than the 3 decades I had spent building the fortune my son did not know existed. You ever hold all the cards and still feel like you are losing? That is what Wednesday night tasted like. Power without a damn thing to do with it. I could approve the loan with 1 phone call. I could reject it with another. I could walk into that Lincoln Park office tomorrow and announce myself as the man who owned the walls, the floor, and the very air my son breathed while he worked. But I could not get him to answer a single call. I made dinner, scrambled eggs, toast, coffee that went cold while I stared at the wall. The January wind rattled the windows, and I listened to the buildings settle around me, creaking like old bones. The phone sat on my kitchen table like a small black coffin, holding all the conversations we were not having. I picked it up, dialed his number one more time. Voicemail. "Drake, it's Dad. 15 now. I'm not going to keep calling forever, but I need you to know. Whatever's going on, whatever I did or didn't do, we can talk about it. Just call me back, son." I hung up and set the phone face down, unable to look at the screen any longer. The irony was not lost on me. I held the financial strings to my son's entire future. Every lease payment he would make, every loan installment, every business decision, all of it depended on structures I had built in silence over 30 years. I had more power over his success than any investor, any partner, any competitor ever would. And yet I could not get him to return a single phone call. I stared at the ceiling for a long time that night, running through possibilities. Maybe he was genuinely swamped. Maybe his phone was broken. Maybe there was some simple explanation that would make me feel foolish for worrying. But the silence had a texture to it now, a shape I was beginning to recognize. This was not busy. This was not distracted. This was deliberate. 14 calls. 3 days. And somewhere in Lincoln Park, my son was building an empire on my money, in my building, while pretending I did not exist. I asked myself the question that would keep me awake until dawn. Was he ignoring me because he was busy, or because someone had convinced him I was not worth answering? I thought about the dinner 3 months ago, the argument about his engagement, the way he had looked at me when I said I was not sure about the woman he planned to marry. Thursday would bring that memory back in full, and by Friday, 5 days of silence would force me to stop waiting and start looking for answers myself. The memory hit me somewhere on Michigan Avenue, 3 months old and sharp as the day it happened. I was driving a fare downtown, half listening to the radio, when my mind drifted back to October. The restaurant in River North, the white tablecloth, the way Drake had looked at me when I said the words I could never take back. "I just worry she's more interested in what you're building than who you are." We'd been talking about Soleil, his fiancée, 27 years old, polished as a magazine cover, with a smile that never quite reached her eyes when she looked at me. I had met her twice before that dinner, once at a coffee shop, once at Drake's apartment, and both times she had looked through me like I was furniture. Drake's face had gone cold. Not angry at first, just closed, like a door slamming shut behind his eyes. "You don't get it, Dad," he said. "You've never understood what it takes to be someone. You're just—" He paused, searching for the word that would hurt the most. "Embarrassing. You want to know what it feels like when your own son calls you embarrassing? It feels like 30 years of sacrifice getting folded into a napkin and thrown on a table. It feels like every late night, every double shift, every dollar you hid so he could build his own life, all of it dismissed in a single word." He threw his napkin down and left before dessert. We had not spoken the same since. The calls became shorter. The visits stopped entirely. And now, 3 months later, he would not even answer the phone. I dropped my fare at Union Station and sat in the taxi for a long time, watching commuters rush past with their coffee cups and their certainties. The word kept echoing. Embarrassing. Maybe I was? Maybe a 67-year-old man in a threadbare jacket driving a taxi his son thought was a symbol of failure. Maybe that was embarrassing. Maybe all the millions hidden in my notebook could not change the fact that I looked like exactly what Drake thought I was. Or maybe the embarrassment was not about me at all. Maybe it was about Soleil and what she saw when she looked at her future father-in-law. 5 days, 18 calls, and the question I could not shake. Was I the cause of this silence, or just the excuse? Friday morning I drove to Oak Park. Bernard was waiting with coffee and a look I recognized, the one he wore when he had an idea he knew I would not like. "The launch is tomorrow," he said, pouring a cup and sliding it across the desk. "Saturday afternoon. Grand opening of Caldwell and Mercer, Lincoln Park location. I know. Are you going? I wrapped my hands around the mug, feeling the heat seep into my fingers. I've thought about it. And? And I don't know what I'd say. Show up at his party, demand to know why he won't return my calls, make a scene in front of his clients? Bernard leaned back, his reading glasses catching the light. What if you didn't say anything at all? What do you mean? You want to know who your son really is? He set down his coffee and looked at me the way he looked at a contract full of hidden clauses. Go to that launch. Don't tell them anything. See how they treat you when they think you're just a cabbie. I stared at him. You want me to spy on my own son? I want you to observe. There's a difference. He leaned forward. If they welcome you, if they treat you with respect even when they think you have nothing to offer, then you'll know the silence was just busy, just stress, just life getting in the way. And if they treat me like dirt? Bernard's plan was simple. Walk into the lion's den dressed as a lamb and see if they tried to eat me. Then you'll know the silence wasn't about being busy, he said quietly, and you'll have all the information you need to decide what comes next. I sat with that for the long moment. The coffee went cold in my hands. Outside, the January wind rattled the windows, and I thought about everything I had built in silence, the properties, the LLC, the fortune no one knew existed. I thought about my son, celebrating his success in a building I owned, borrowing money that flowed through my accounts, building a future on a foundation I had poured. And I thought about the word he had used 3 months ago. Embarrassing. Time to find out if he meant it. Saturday morning, I put on my oldest jacket, the corduroy one with the frayed cuffs and the coffee stain I had never bothered to remove. I drove my 19-year-old Crown Victoria through the snow-cleared streets of Lincoln Park and parked between a BMW and a Mercedes. Through the glass windows, I could see the launch party glittering. Champagne. Laughter. My son in a tailored suit shaking hands with strangers. And somewhere in that room, his fiancée was watching the door. Time to see what kind of man Drake had become when he thought his father had nothing to offer. What I found inside would be worse than silence. It would be the truth. My Crown Victoria looked like a mistake parked between a Porsche and a Mercedes. Exactly the way I suspected my son saw me. I sat behind the wheel for a long moment, watching the launch party through the glass storefront. The Lincoln Park office gleamed with fresh paint and polished brass, and inside dozens of well-dressed strangers milled about with champagne flutes and business cards. And there, at the center of it all, stood my son. Drake Caldwell, 29 years old, clean-shaven and sharp-suited, laughed at something an investor said. He looked confident, successful, happy. His tailored jacket probably cost more than my monthly rent, and the watch on his wrist caught the afternoon light like a small sun. The relief hit me so hard I had to grip the steering wheel. He was alive, healthy, thriving. 5 days of imagining car wrecks and hospital beds, of catastrophizing every silence into tragedy, and here he was, drinking champagne like a man without a single care in the world. The relief lasted about 3 seconds. Then I noticed he had not looked toward the door once, not scanning for someone running late, not expecting anyone he actually wanted to see. He was exactly where he wanted to be, surrounded by exactly who he wanted to be with. 5 days of terror, and he was drinking champagne. 5 days of voicemails, and he was laughing with strangers. I stepped out of the taxi, the January cold biting through my corduroy jacket. The frayed cuffs caught the wind as I walked toward the entrance, and I noticed a woman in heels glance at my car, then at me, then quickly away. I was not the clientele she expected. The door opened with a soft chime. The smell of expensive perfume and fresh flowers washed over me, mixed with something sharper. Ambition, maybe, or money changing hands. Every head turned at the sound, and for one long moment every conversation paused. Walking into that lobby felt like stepping onto a stage where everyone knew the play except me, and I was clearly in the wrong costume. I spotted Drake near the back, still mid-conversation. His smile froze the instant his eyes landed on me. not the freeze of surprise, the kind you get when someone you love walks through an unexpected door. This was different. This was the freeze of calculation. Who saw? How much damage? What to do? He excused himself from the investor and crossed the room in quick, tight steps. No embrace. No relief. No, Dad? I've been meaning to call. Just a whispered question that cut deeper than 5 days of silence ever had. Dad, what are you doing here? I stared at him. This man I had raised, this stranger wearing my son's face. The words I had rehearsed in the car, the worried father speech, the gentle confrontation, dissolved somewhere between my throat and my tongue. I've been calling for 5 days, I said quietly. Well, you didn't answer. I was worried. His jaw tightened. His eyes flicked to the investors behind me, then back to my face, lingering for just a moment on my jacket. The coffee stain, the frayed cuffs, the buttons that did not quite match because I had replaced one in 2019 and could not find the same style. This really isn't a good time, he said. Can we talk about this later? Later. The same word I had heard for 3 months. Later, when he had time. Later, when the investors were gone. Later, when I was not standing in his gleaming lobby looking like everything he was trying to leave behind. I had driven through a blizzard of fear to get here. He looked at me like I had tracked mud on his new carpet. I thought something had happened to you, I said, my voice steady despite the crack forming somewhere behind my ribs. I thought you were hurt. I'm fine, Dad. He cut me off, glancing over his shoulder. I've just been busy. The launch, the loan applications, He stopped himself, pressing his lips together. Look, I appreciate you coming, but this isn't the place. His eyes darted to the investors behind me, then back to my frayed jacket, and I watched something pass across his face. Not shame, exactly. Something worse. Calculation. Like he was measuring how much damage my presence might cost him. Like he was weighing his father's worth against the opinions of strangers with checkbooks. I had built the foundation beneath his feet. I owned the walls around him. Every dollar he was borrowing to impress these people flowed through accounts with my name on them, and he was looking at me like I was a stain he needed to hide. Before I could speak, before I could decide whether to stay or go, a woman's voice cut through the champagne chatter. Drake, honey, who's this? I turned toward the sound. She was 27, maybe, with auburn hair swept into a precise updo and a smile that did not quite reach her eyes. Her dress probably cost more than my entire wardrobe, and the way she looked at me, scanning my jacket, my shoes, my face, told me everything I needed to know. Soleil Mercer was about to meet her future father-in-law, and she was already deciding how much I was worth. She crossed the room like a woman who had already decided I was a problem to be solved. Heels clicking, smile sharpening, eyes cataloging every frayed thread on my jacket. Soleil Mercer, 27 years old, with sharp cheekbones and sharper ambition. The diamond on her finger caught the light as she adjusted it, a nervous habit or a deliberate reminder of what she had secured. She stopped beside Drake and slipped her hand through his arm, tilting her head at me with the polite curiosity you might show a stray that wandered in from the cold. Drake's father, she said, not quite a question. I don't think we've been properly introduced. Vernon Caldwell. I extended my hand. She took it briefly, her fingers cool and dry, then released it like she was setting down something mildly unpleasant. Her eyes traveled from my face to my shoes and back again, calculating. Well, she said, her voice pitched just low enough that only Drake and I could hear. It's wonderful you could make it. Drake's told me so much about you. She had not finished the sentence before she was turning to Drake, her hand on his arm tightening almost imperceptibly. Honey, the investors are about to sit down for the presentation. Can you help me with the seating? She glanced at me, then back at Drake, and lowered her voice just enough that I was clearly meant to hear. Can he at least stay in the back? His outfit sends the wrong message. His outfit sends the wrong message. 6 words. That is what 35 years of raising him was worth. 6 words and a closed door. Drake did not argue. He did not even flinch. He just nodded, his eyes sliding past me like I was furniture. "Dad, maybe you could wait in the hall for a bit. Just until the main presentations are done. There's a bench out there. It's comfortable, and then we can—" "Of course," I said. My voice was steady, I do not know how. I turned and walked toward the door, my shoes silent on the polished floor. No one stopped me. No one called after me. The champagne chatter resumed before I reached the exit, as if my departure had been scripted all along. The hallway was empty. White walls, gray carpet, a long glass window that looked back into the office. I found the bench Drake had mentioned and sat down, my hands resting on my knees, my eyes fixed on the party I was no longer welcome to attend. Through the glass I watched my son. He worked the room like a man born to it. Handshakes, laughter, the casual touch on an elbow that said, "Trust me." He poured champagne for strangers. He pulled out chairs for women he had met an hour ago. He performed perfectly, effortlessly, like the word "dad" had never left his lips. You ever stand outside a room watching your own child pretend you do not exist? It is quieter than you would think. Quieter and sharper. 5 days of imagining him dead. 5 days of voicemails, of sleepless nights, of imagining hospital beds and police officers at my door. And now I sat on a bench in an empty hallway, watching him charm the very strangers for whom I had been deemed unfit. I had built this building. My money held the lease. The loan he was celebrating flowed through accounts I controlled. Every dollar in that room traced back to a notebook hidden behind my sock drawer. And I was not worth a seat at the table. The glass wall between us might as well have been a mile of concrete. I could see everything and touch nothing. I sat there for a long time. Long enough to watch the presentation begin and end. Long enough to watch Soleil lean into Drake and whisper something that made him smile. Long enough to wonder if I had imagined the boy who used to run into my arms when I came home from work, who used to fall asleep on my shoulder during long drives. That boy was gone. This man had taken his place. I was about to leave. I had my answer. Did I not? Bernard's test had worked. I knew who my son had become when he thought his father had nothing to offer. I knew who Soleil was, and I knew the kind of man Drake became when she whispered in his ear. I stood up, my hand reaching for the exit, and then I heard voices, drifting from a cracked door down the hall. An office, maybe, or a supply room. Drake's voice first, then Soleil's, stepping away from the party for a private word. I would not have stopped if I had not caught the phrase. 3 words that froze me with my hand on the door handle. Care facility. He'd be more comfortable somewhere with staff. I stood perfectly still, my breath held, my heart pounding against my ribs. Care facility, somewhere with staff. They were not just embarrassed by me. They were not just hiding me from investors. They were planning to put me away. I should have walked away. That is what a dignified man would do. Turn around, leave quietly, preserve whatever scraps of pride remained. But dignity does not get you answers. So I pressed my shoulder against the wall, held my breath, and listened. The door was cracked just enough. Their voices carried low and confident, the kind of conversation you have when you are certain no one is listening. He doesn't have any significant assets, Drake. Soleil's voice, smooth as polished glass. I had someone run a basic check. The apartment is rented. The car is worth maybe $3,000. His income is Social Security and whatever he makes driving that taxi. She said it like she was reading an inventory list, like I was furniture to be appraised and found wanting. The cost of caring for him will drain resources we need for the business, she continued. We're talking years, Drake, decades maybe, medical bills, in-home care, the constant interruptions. Is that really what you want hanging over us? I heard Drake shift. A chair creaked. What are you suggesting? Lakeside Elder Care in Skokie. I toured it last week. Private rooms, professional staff, activities. It's high-end but reasonable, especially split between us and whatever Medicaid covers. He'd be comfortable. Last week. She had toured a facility last week. While I was calling my son, leaving voicemails, imagining him dead in a ditch somewhere, she was walking through a nursing home, picking out the room where she planned to put me. Let me tell you what it sounds like when your own child considers putting you away. It sounds reasonable. That is the worst part. It sounds practical and kind and absolutely hollow. The words make sense on paper. Professional care, comfortable rooms, freeing up resources. They sound like solutions. They feel like being erased. I don't know, Drake said. He's my father. 3 words. I don't know. Not absolutely not. Not that's my father you're talking about. Not I could never do that to him. Just 3 words of cowardice dressed up as consideration. Exactly, Soleil said, her voice warming like she had won something. He's your father, and fathers deserve proper care from professionals, not to burden their children's futures. We'd be doing him a favor. A favor? Warehousing me in Skokie while they built their empire in my building with my money, on my foundation. A favor. The timing works, she added. The business launch stabilizes, we move forward with the wedding, and by spring he could be settled somewhere comfortable. We'd visit on Sundays. He'd understand. Drake was quiet for a long moment. I pressed closer to the wall, my heart hammering against my ribs. Say no, I thought. Say something. Prove me wrong about who you have become. Let me think about it, he said finally. Let me think about it. Not yes, but not no. Not defense, but not refusal. Just the weak middle ground of a man who had already surrendered and was pretending otherwise. I had my answer. I stepped back from the door, careful to keep my footsteps silent. The hallway stretched ahead of me, white and empty, and the glass walls still showed the party glittering on the other side. Champagne, laughter, the future my son was building while he considered which facility to put me in. My chest ached. Not the heart condition, though that was there too, a quiet reminder that time was not unlimited. This was something different. This was the ache of watching your own blood treat you like a line item on a budget. An inconvenience to be managed. A problem to be solved. He doesn't have any significant assets. I almost laughed. Almost. The sound died somewhere in my throat, replaced by something colder, something quieter, something that felt like the first stirrings of a plan. She had no idea who she was trying to put away. I walked out of that building without looking back. The January air hit my face like a slap, but I welcomed it. The cold felt real, honest, uncomplicated, everything that conversation had not been. My Crown Victoria sat where I had left it, shabby and dependable, wedged between luxury cars that cost more than my annual rent. I climbed inside and sat there for a long time, my hands on the wheel, staring at the gleaming sign above the door. Caldwell and Mercer. My name on his sign, my building under his feet, my money flowing through his accounts. And he was planning to put me in a nursing home because his fiancée thought I had nothing to offer. I started the engine and pulled into traffic, my mind already turning over the pieces. The notebook in my closet, the 22 addresses, the fortune no one knew existed. Bernard's advice echoing in my head. The confrontation would come. But first I needed to know exactly who had proposed this plan. I needed to hear Drake admit it to my face. I needed to know if there was anything left of my son worth saving. By the time I reached Pilsen, the anger had cooled into something harder, something patient. They wanted to put me away. They had no idea what I was about to do. I turned around at the elevator. The plan forming in my mind could wait. The cold patience could wait. Right now I needed to hear it from my son's mouth. Not through a cracked door, not overheard in whispers, but directly, face to face. I walked back through that lobby like I owned the place. Because I did. The party was still in full swing, champagne flowing, investors laughing at jokes that were not funny. I ignored all of it. I pushed through the crowd, found the hallway, found the door marked private, and pushed it open without knocking. Drake was alone at his desk, a stack of papers in front of him. He looked up, and for one unguarded moment I saw fear flicker across his face. "Dad, I thought you left." "I heard you through the door." I stepped inside and closed it behind me. Care facility. Freeing up resources. Tell me to my face, whose idea was this? His jaw tightened. His eyes dropped to the desk, then back up, searching for something. The right angle, the right words, the right lie. You ever watch your own son search for the right lie? It is like watching someone drown in shallow water. You could save them, but they put themselves there. Dad, it's not... We just thought you'd be more comfortable somewhere with proper care. His voice was careful, measured, the tone of a man reciting lines he had rehearsed. It's not abandonment. It's just realistic planning. You're getting older, and we want to make sure you're taken care of. Taken care of, I repeated. In a facility in Skokie. His face went pale. You heard that? I heard enough. He stood up, his chair scraping against the floor. Look, it's just an option we've been exploring. Nothing's decided. We wanted to find a place with good staff, nice amenities, somewhere you'd be comfortable while we focus on getting the business off the ground. While you focus on the business. I let the word sit there. And I would be where exactly? Comfortable? That's the word you keep using. Dad. The door opened behind me. Soleil walked in like she owned the conversation, like she owned everything. The room, the business, my son, and now apparently the right to decide where I spent my remaining years. What's going on? She asked, her voice bright and curious, as if she had not just been plotting my removal an hour ago. He heard us, Drake said quietly. Something shifted in her face. The bright curiosity dimmed, replaced by something cooler. Something that did not bother pretending anymore. I see, she said. She closed the door behind her and leaned against it, arms crossed. Well then, let's not dance around it. By all means, I said, don't dance. It was my idea. She said it without flinching, without apology, without even the decency to look uncomfortable. The care facility. I toured 3 of them last month. Lakeside Elder Care in Skokie is the best option for someone in your situation. My situation? Yes. She tilted her head, studying me like I was a problem on a spreadsheet. You don't have any significant assets. Your income is limited. The cost of caring for you, medical bills, potential emergencies, the constant need for attention would cripple our business before it even gets started. No significant assets. She said it like she was reading a credit report, like 67 years of living could be reduced to a balance sheet, and I had come up short. You'd be a burden otherwise, she continued. I'm not saying that to be cruel. I'm saying it because it's true, and sometimes the kindest thing we can do is be honest about limitations. I looked at my son. He was staring at the floor, his shoulders tight, his mouth pressed into a thin line, not defending me. Not even looking at me. Drake, I said quietly, is this what you want? He raised his eyes, and for a moment I thought I saw something. Regret, maybe, or shame. But then Soleil's hand touched his arm, a small gesture of possession, and whatever I had seen disappeared. I think it makes sense, he said. In the long run. In the long run? The phrase hung in the air like a verdict. I looked at Soleil. This woman who had measured my life and found it wanting, who had toured nursing homes while my calls went unanswered, who had convinced my son that his father was an obstacle to be removed, and I smiled, not warmly, the kind of smile Bernard would recognize, the kind that meant the game had just changed and she did not know it yet. Thank you for your honesty, I said. She blinked, surprised by the calm. You're welcome? One more question. I kept my voice even, pleasant, the voice of a man who had already won and was just gathering evidence. Who proposed this idea first, you or my son? She hesitated for the first time. Her eyes flicked to Drake, then back to me. I did, she said. Does it matter? I nodded slowly. It matters very much. I turned and walked out of the office, leaving them staring after me. I had what I needed. Now it was time to show them exactly who they were trying to put away. By the time I got home, the sun was gone, and so was the rage. What replaced it was something quieter and far more dangerous. I did not turn on the lights. The darkness felt appropriate. I walked to the closet, reached behind the sock drawer, and pulled out the notebook. The kitchen table was cold under my palms as I spread the pages open. 22 addresses, properties I had bought one at a time over 30 years, paid off, maintained, rented to families who needed a fair landlord in a city full of unfair ones, each one worth more than Drake's entire loan request, all of them invisible to the woman who had called me a burden. I ran my finger down the list, the same way I had done 1,000 times before. But tonight, the counting felt different. Tonight, it was not about security or legacy, or the quiet satisfaction of building something in silence. Tonight it was about consequences. You want to know what revenge feels like when you are 67? It does not feel hot. It feels patient. It feels like a man who has been underestimated his entire life finally getting to prove exactly how wrong they were. The young rush into anger because they have time to recover from mistakes. The old take their time because they know exactly how much each move costs. I closed the notebook and set it on the table. Tomorrow, I would call Bernard. Tomorrow, we would build something together. Not a building this time, but a reckoning. Sunday morning, I drove to Oak Park. Bernard was waiting with coffee and a legal pad, his reading glasses already perched on his forehead. He took one look at my face and nodded slowly. That bad? Worse. I sat down across from him and told him everything. The exile to the hallway, the overheard conversation, the nursing home in Skokie, the direct confrontation. Soleil's words delivered to my face like a diagnosis. No significant assets. A burden. Bernard listened without interrupting, his pen moving across the legal pad in quick, tight strokes. When I finished, he set down the pen and leaned back. So, he said, what do you want to do? I want them to understand exactly who they tried to throw away. He nodded again, slower this time. Then let's build a plan. Bernard's office became a war room that Sunday. 2 old men with reading glasses and whiskey, drawing battle plans on legal pads. The afternoon light shifted across the walls as we worked, turning gold, then orange, then fading into evening. Step 1, Bernard said, tapping his pen against the paper. The loan. I'll flag the file for missing documentation. Standard procedure, nothing suspicious. Buys us 2 weeks, maybe 3, while they scramble to provide paperwork they should have had ready. And if they get it ready, then I'll find something else missing. There's always something missing in an $850,000 loan file. I nodded. The pressure would build slowly. Drake would start feeling it before he understood why. Step 2, I said. I need proof she actually visited that nursing home, not just what I overheard, something documented. Bernard thought for a moment. I know someone at Lakeside Elder Care. Administrative staff, been there 15 years. If Soleil toured the facility, there'll be a visitor log, maybe a consultation request. Get it. Consider it done. He wrote something on the legal pad, then looked up at me with the expression he wore when asking the question that mattered. Step 3. When do you want them to know who really controls Meridian Holdings? I'd been thinking about this since Saturday night. The revelation was the weapon, but the timing was the trigger. When it will cost them the most, I said quietly. When the loan is on the verge of approval or rejection. When they're desperate enough to listen and humble enough to hear. Bernard smiled, not warmly, but with the satisfaction of a man who appreciated precision. You're going to let them think they're drowning before you reveal you've been holding the life preserver the whole time. No, I said. I'm going to let them think they're drowning. Then I'm going to decide if they're worth saving. 3 steps. That was all it would take to dismantle everything they thought they were building, and they would never see it coming because they had never bothered to look. The plan was not about money. It was not even about revenge, not really. It was about a question I had been asking myself for 30 years. Who would my son become when he thought his father had nothing to offer? Now I had my answer. He had become a man who let his fiancée plan to warehouse me in Skokie. The next question was harder. Was there anything left worth saving? Was there still a version of Drake buried somewhere under the ambition and the fear and the shame of his father's corduroy jacket? I did not know yet, but I was about to find out. Bernard filed the documentation request Monday morning. By Tuesday, the loan was flagged. By Wednesday, Drake would start feeling pressure he could not explain. And somewhere in that pipeline, his entire future was quietly beginning to collapse. One form, one signature, one delay at a time. The first crack would come soon. And when it did, he would call. The call came on a Wednesday, my son's name lighting up my phone for the first time in weeks. I knew before I answered that the pressure was working. "Dad?" His voice was tight, the confidence stripped away. "Do you have time to meet? I need some advice." Advice? After weeks of silence, after the nursing home conversation, after calling me embarrassing, now he needed advice. "Of course," I said. "Where?" We met at a cafe in Pilsen, a small place on 18th Street, where the coffee was strong and the tables were far enough apart for private conversation. Drake was already there when I arrived, his knee bouncing under the table, a half-empty cup in front of him. He looked tired, dark circles under his eyes, tie loosened, the sharp confidence from the launch party nowhere to be seen. "Thanks for coming," he said as I sat down. "I know things have been weird between us." Weird is one word for it. He had the grace to look uncomfortable. "Yeah, look, I'm sorry about the launch, the hallway thing. Soleil was stressed, and I should have—" "What do you need, Drake?" He stopped, took a breath, and leaned forward. "The loan. The one for the business." It hit a wall. I ordered coffee and listened. The story came out in fragments. Documentation requests, deadline extensions, paperwork that had already been submitted now mysteriously missing from the file. The lease payment was due in 12 days. If the loan did not clear, they would lose the office space. "You want to know what patience tastes like?" "It tastes like coffee across from your own son while he complains about a problem you created and thanks you for listening." "I don't understand what's happening," Drake said, running a hand through his hair. "We had everything in order. The bank approved the preliminary, the collateral was set, and then out of nowhere—" "What collateral?" "The office lease. It's held by some company as part of the loan structure. They're the ones gumming up the works." I took a slow sip of my coffee. "What company?" "Something called Meridian Holdings." He said the name like it was a curse. "They're involved in the loan somehow. Guarantor, maybe, or some kind of silent investor. I don't know. All I know is they're holding everything up." "Meridian Holdings." He had no idea he was cursing his own father. "Never heard of them," I said, my voice neutral. "What do you know about the owner?" Drake shook his head. "Nothing. Just some faceless LLC. Probably some old investor who doesn't understand modern business. These old money types buy properties and sit on them without any idea how the market actually works. Some old investor who doesn't understand modern business. Is that what 67 years looked like to him? Obsolete? Out of touch? A relic in a corduroy jacket who did not understand the world his son was trying to build?" I set down my coffee cup carefully. "That must be frustrating," I said. "Working this hard and having someone invisible hold all the cards." "Exactly." Drake exhaled, some of the tension leaving his shoulders. "That's exactly it. I can't fight something I can't see. And Soleil is losing her mind. She's already talking about backup plans, scaling down, maybe pushing the second office opening to next year. That sounds stressful for both of you." "It is." He looked at me. Really looked, for the first time since I had sat down. "I know I've been distant. I know the launch was awkward. But you're the only person I know who's been in business this long. Do you have any contacts? Anyone who might know how to deal with a situation like this?" I wanted to laugh. I wanted to pull out my phone, show him the notebook, watch his face change as he realized the faceless LLC he was cursing had a very specific face, the one sitting across from him. But that was not the plan, not yet. "I might know some people," I said slowly. "Let me ask around. See if anyone in my network has heard of this Meridian Holdings." "Really?" The hope in his voice was almost painful. "That would be incredible, Dad. Thank you." He thanked me. Actually thanked me. The same son who had let his fiancée exile me to a hallway, who had considered putting me in a nursing home, who had called me embarrassing 3 months ago. He was thanking me for offering to help with a problem I had created. We talked for another 20 minutes. He asked about my health, the first time in months, and I told him the doctor wanted some tests. He nodded, said I should take care of myself, and did not offer to come to the appointment. When we finished, he shook my hand like I was a business contact and walked to his car. I watched him go. Then I pulled out my phone and texted Bernard 3 words. He took the bait. The reply came 30 seconds later. Good. The nursing home documentation arrives tomorrow. I pocketed the phone and walked to my taxi, the January wind biting through my jacket. Step 1 was complete. Step 2 was about to begin, and Drake still had no idea who was holding all the cards. Bernard's text came at 6 in the morning. Get here now. I have what you need. I was dressed and in the Crown Victoria within 10 minutes. The January streets were quiet, the city still waking, and I made it to Oak Park before the sun had fully cleared the rooftops. Bernard met me at the door with coffee in hand and a look on his face I recognized, the look of a man holding a winning card. Kitchen table, he said. I didn't want to do this over the phone. The documents were spread across the oak surface like evidence at a trial. Photocopies mostly, with a few originals that bore the letterhead of Lakeside Elder Care. Bernard's contact had delivered. She was there, Bernard said, settling into his chair across from me. Tuesday afternoon, 3 days ago. Signed the visitor log at 2:15, left at 3:40. I stared at the papers, my coffee growing cold in my hands. She toured room 114, he continued. Private suite, garden view, 3rd floor. Asked about long-term care rates, dietary accommodations, visitation policies. She wanted to know if families could restrict visitors. Room 114. She had picked out a specific room. Not just the idea of putting me away. She had already chosen which walls would hold me, which window I would look through while my son built his empire on money I had given him. Did she leave contact information? Bernard slid a paper across the table. Better. She left a description of the prospective resident. I picked up the intake consultation form. The handwriting was neat, professional, some administrator copying down Soleil's words during the tour. My eyes found the relevant section. Prospective resident. Details. 67-year-old male. Currently independent, but showing early signs of decline. Family seeking preventive placement to ensure quality care before health deteriorates further. Primary contact listed as daughter-in-law. You want to know what declining feels like when it is written about you by someone who has never watched you work a 16-hour shift? It feels like a verdict delivered before the trial. It feels like being measured for a coffin while you are still breathing. Independent but declining. I had driven my taxi last week. I had climbed the stairs to my apartment without losing my breath. I had sat across from my son at a cafe and listened to him complain about problems I had created, and he had not noticed anything declining about me. But Soleil had already written my ending. She had already decided what my story would be. There's more, Bernard said quietly. He handed me another paper, a follow-up form dated 1 day after the tour. She called back Wednesday morning, asked about availability for late February or early March. Said the family was hoping to have everything in place before a major business milestone, before the business launched properly, before the loan cleared, before the wedding probably. Get the old man settled somewhere with staff, free up the resources, and move forward without the embarrassment of a taxi driver father-in-law. I set the papers down and pressed my palms flat against the table. The wood was cool and solid beneath my hands, real in a way that the rage building in my chest was not. Her phone number is on the callback request, Bernard added, and her full name, Soleil Mercer, listed as primary family contact. Not Drake, not my son. His fiancée had put her own name as the primary contact for putting me away. Does Drake know about any of this? I asked. Bernard shook his head. No way to tell from the paperwork, but she listed herself as the decision-maker. Either he's not involved or he's letting her handle it. Letting her handle it. The same way he had let her handle asking me to wait in the hallway. The same way he had let her handle the conversation about my assets, my son, the man I had raised, stepping back and letting someone else decide my fate. That piece of paper was worth more than evidence. It was ammunition, and I now had everything I needed to pull the trigger. "What now?" Bernard asked. I looked at him across the table. The morning light caught the silver in his hair, the reading glasses perched on his forehead, the patient eyes of a man who had been my friend for 3 decades. "Now we stop playing defense," I said. I folded the intake form carefully, the paper crisp against my fingers, and slipped it into my jacket pocket. Soleil's phone number, her description of me, her plan laid bare in facility intake notes. "The loan," Bernard said. "You want me to proceed?" "Full withdrawal. Every piece of support Meridian Holdings provides to Caldwell and Mercer. Pull it. The loan guarantee, the lease terms, everything." Bernard nodded slowly. "That'll collapse the whole deal. The bank won't proceed without the collateral structure." "I know. Drake will lose everything he's built." I stood up, my hand pressing against the pocket where the paper rested. "Maybe," I said, "or maybe he'll finally have to look at who his father really is." I walked out of Bernard's house with the sunrise warming my back and the documents against my chest. Step 3 would begin within the hour. The dominoes were about to fall. I sat across from Bernard, the nursing home document between us like a declaration of war, and gave the order I had been building toward for 3 weeks. "The loan guarantee," I said. "Withdraw it." Bernard's fingers hovered over his laptop keyboard. He had been ready for this. He knew it was coming the moment I walked in with that intake form. But he waited, giving me one last chance to reconsider. I did not reconsider. "The office lease backing," I continued. "Terminate it. Everything Meridian Holdings touches in their business. Pull it, all of it." Bernard nodded slowly and began typing. The keys clicked in the quiet room, each stroke a small earthquake building toward something larger. You want to know what justice feels like when you have been planning it for weeks? It feels like typing. It feels like signatures on documents you cannot unread. It feels quieter than you would expect. No thunder, no dramatic music, just an old man in Oak Park pressing buttons that will reshape his son's entire future. I watched Bernard work, his screen filled with forms, withdrawal requests, termination notices, formal communications to banks and landlords. 30 years of legal experience distilled into clean, professional language that would undo everything Drake thought he had built. "The loan guarantee withdrawal goes to the bank first," Bernard said, not looking up. "They'll process it within 48 hours. Once that's done, the collateral structure collapses. The landlord gets notified automatically through the lease agreement." "Good." He paused, his hands still on the keyboard. "Once I file this, there's no taking it back. The bank will process, the landlord will act, and everything they've built starts falling. Are you sure?" I thought about room 114. The garden view, the description she had written. Independent, but declining. I thought about my son sitting across from me at the cafe, complaining about some faceless LLC while I held my coffee and smiled. "She picked out a room for me, Bernard. She described me as declining to a stranger with a clipboard. She planned to warehouse me in Skokie while building her empire on money I gave her fiancé." I met his eyes. "I have never been more sure of anything in my life." Was this revenge? Maybe. Was it necessary? Absolutely. Sometimes the only way to teach someone the value of what they have is to take it away. Sometimes the only way to find out who your son really is to strip away everything that's propping him up. Before I tell you exactly what instructions I gave Bernard, are you still with me? Comment A if you think what I am about to do is justified, or B if you think I have gone too far, and tell me why in a few words. Please note, some details ahead are dramatized for emotional impact. What matters is the lesson. Bernard looked at me one more time, then turned back to his screen. "Withdrawal of loan guarantee from Caldwell and Mercer Real Estate," he read aloud as he typed. "Effective immediately. Termination of lease collateral backing. Effective immediately. Notification to First Chicago Commercial Bank regarding suspension of all Meridian Holdings financial support for referenced borrower." His finger hovered over the Enter key. Last chance, he said. Send it. He pressed the key. The screen flashed confirmation. By 4 that afternoon it was done. The loan guarantee suspended, the office lease backing voided, every financial thread connecting my son's business to my hidden empire severed with the efficiency of 3 decades of legal expertise. Bernard closed his laptop and looked at me with something between admiration and concern. They'll feel this by Thursday, he said. The bank will notify them first. Then the landlord will call about the lease terms changing. And once they start digging, they'll find that everything they thought was stable has suddenly turned to sand. Good. Drake will lose everything he's built if he can't find alternative financing. I stood up, my hand brushing against the jacket pocket where the nursing home document still rested. Maybe, I said, or maybe he'll finally have to decide what matters more, his father or his fiancée's plans. Bernard walked me to the door. The January sun was already dropping toward the rooftops, painting Oak Park in shades of orange and gold. What happens when he finds out it's you? Bernard asked. That depends on him. And if he doesn't figure it out? I smiled, not warmly. Then I'll tell him myself, when the time is right. I drove home through the fading daylight, the documents filed, the dominoes set. Somewhere in Lincoln Park, my son was probably still working, still planning, still believing that his future was secure. He had no idea what was coming. Let it shake, I thought. Let them feel exactly what they made me feel. Helpless, blindsided, wondering what happened to the ground beneath their feet. Thursday would come faster than any of us expected, and so would Drake's panic. Thursday hit them exactly the way Bernard said it would. I know because Drake called me in a panic before noon. Dad? His voice cracked on the single syllable. In the background I could hear Soleil. Not words, just the sharp edge of her voice raised in what sounded like controlled hysteria. Dad, I don't understand what's happening. I sat at my kitchen table, the January sun warming the window beside me, and listened to my son's world fall apart. The lease guarantee, he continued, words tumbling over each other. It just vanished. The landlord called this morning. Meridian Holdings withdrew their backing. They're giving us 10 days to find new collateral or vacate the premises. 10 days, I repeated, keeping my voice neutral. 10 days. We just signed a 5-year lease. We just had the launch party. And now they're saying we have to leave unless we can find someone else to guarantee the terms. You want to know what a vindication sounds like? It sounds like your son's voice cracking on the phone, asking for help from the man he tried to put away. It sounds like Soleil screaming in the background about timelines and investors while the foundation she thought was so solid turns to sand beneath her feet. Have you talked to the bank about the loan? I asked. I have a meeting this afternoon, 3 o'clock, with the branch manager. Drake exhaled sharply. Dad, this can't be coincidence. The lease and the loan both tied to the same company, both collapsing at the same time. Something's going on. Someone is doing this to us. Do you have any idea who? That's what I'm going to find out. I wished him luck and hung up. Then I poured myself a cup of coffee and sat in the quiet of my apartment, waiting. Bernard called that evening with the details. The bank meeting happened, he said. My contact was in the room. Conrad Ashford delivered the news himself. Conrad Ashford, 48 years old, branch manager at First Chicago Commercial, the kind of man with a regulation haircut and a regulation smile who delivered bad news with professional sympathy. He had no idea he was handing Drake the first clue to his father's hidden empire. What did he tell them? Exactly what we filed. The loan is frozen per Meridian Holdings instructions. No timeline for resolution. No appeal process mentioned. Bernard paused. Your son asked who owns the LLC. I set down my coffee cup. And? Ashford checked his records. Meridian Holdings is registered to a P.O. box in Pilsen. That's as far as the bank's information goes. The dominoes were falling exactly the way Bernard had drawn them up, one after another, each one knocking down the next piece of their carefully built future. The lease guarantee gone, the loan suspended, and now the first thread leading back to me. How did Drake react? According to my contact, he stared at that address for a full minute. Didn't say anything, just stared. Then he asked if there was any way to find out more about the owner. What did Ashford tell him? That Meridian Holdings is a private LLC. The bank doesn't have access to ownership records beyond what's filed with the state. If Drake wants to know more, he'll have to dig himself. I leaned back in my chair, watching the evening light fade outside my window. Pilsen. The P.O. box was 2 blocks from my apartment, in the same strip mall where I had been picking up mail for 30 years. Drake had stared at that address, and something had clicked behind his eyes. Not the full picture yet, but the first corner of it. "He's going to start looking," Bernard said. "Really looking. The P.O. box is a thread, and if he pulls it hard enough, he'll find me. He'll find Meridian Holdings' registered agent first, then the property records, then the tax filings." Bernard's voice was careful. "It's a trail, Vern. A short one. Anyone with access to public records could follow it in a day or two." I thought about my son sitting in that bank office, staring at an address 2 blocks from the apartment where he had grown up. The apartment he had not visited in months. The apartment where his father, the embarrassing taxi driver with no significant assets, had been quietly building an empire while everyone looked the other way. "Let him pull," I said. "You're sure? It's almost time for him to know exactly whose ground he's been standing on." Bernard was quiet for a moment. Then I heard the clink of glass, whiskey being poured, our usual signal that the business conversation was over and the personal one could begin. "What happens when he finds out?" he asked. "That depends on what he does with the information. And if he comes to you angry, then I'll show him the nursing home paperwork, room 114, Garden View, 67-year-old male, independent but declining." Bernard let out a long breath. "You've thought this through." "I've had 3 weeks to think about nothing else." I finished my coffee and watched the last light disappear from the Pilsen skyline. The pressure was about to crack more than just their business. It was about to crack everything. Bernard called me Saturday morning with the kind of news that makes waiting worthwhile. They're turning on each other. I set down my coffee and listened. Through his network, contacts at the building, at the bank, people who heard things and reported back. Bernard had pieced together what happened after Drake left that bank meeting with the Pilsen address burning in his mind. He went home to Soleil, and the conversation had not gone well. "She blamed him for poor vetting," Bernard said he should have researched Meridian Holdings before signing anything. He called her controlling. Said she'd been managing every detail of the business without consulting him. And then, in the heat of the argument, she said something she shouldn't have. I waited. She said she'd heard Meridian Holdings was connected to some old guy in the neighborhood. Those were her exact words. "Some old guy in the neighborhood." You ever wonder what secrets sound like when they are about to break open? They sound like a woman saying too much during a fight she's already losing. They sound like the wrong words at the wrong time, revealing something that should have stayed hidden. "How does she know anything about Meridian Holdings?" I asked. "That's the question, isn't it?" Bernard's voice was careful. "Either she's been doing her own digging and found something, or she knew more than she was letting on from the start." I thought about Soleil touring that nursing home in Skokie, about her description of me. Independent but declining, about the way she had measured my worth in assets and found me wanting. Had she been investigating me? Had she stumbled onto something about Meridian Holdings and decided I was nobody worth worrying about? Or had she always known more than she pretended? What did Drake do after she said that? He went quiet, completely quiet, then he left. Where? The Chicago Public Records Office. He was there by 3 o'clock. 2 blocks. That is all that separated my son from the truth. 2 blocks and 22 years of carefully maintained silence. 2 blocks between my apartment and the P.O. box where Meridian Holdings received its mail. 2 blocks between the father he thought was worthless and the empire he never knew existed. "He found the registration," Bernard continued. "Meridian Holdings, LLC, incorporated in Illinois in 2004. Owner obscured through a corporate layer structure, but the service address is right there in black and white. P.O. Box 847, Pilsen, 2 blocks from my apartment." 2 blocks from your apartment. I closed my eyes and tried to imagine it. My son standing at a public records counter, holding a printout with an address he had walked past 1,000 times as a child. The P.O. box at the corner of 18th and Blue Island, in the same strip mall where we used to buy groceries when he was small. "The clerk said he stared at that paper for 5 minutes," Bernard said. "Didn't move, didn't speak, just stared. Then he asked if there was any way to find out who the registered agent was." "What did they tell him?" "That he'd need to file a formal request, takes 72 hours. "So he doesn't have my name yet?" "Not officially, but Vern, he's putting it together. The address is too close to be coincidence. The timing is too perfect. He's not stupid." "No. My son was not stupid. He had built a business, earned his CPA, convinced investors to back his vision. He was many things. Ambitious, proud, easily influenced by the wrong woman. But he was not stupid, and now he was standing at the edge of a truth that would rewrite everything he thought he knew about his father. He had stared at that address for 5 minutes. 5 minutes of his entire worldview reorganizing itself around a P.O. box he had never known existed. 5 minutes of asking himself the question that had probably never occurred to him before. What if his father was not who he seemed to be? "What happens now?" Bernard asked. I finished my coffee and watched the morning light move across my kitchen wall. The same light that had been there for 30 years. The same apartment. The same table where Drake had learned to count. Where we had celebrated birthdays. Where he had stopped visiting once he decided his father was an embarrassment. "Now we wait," I said. "He has the address. He has the registration date. He has 29 years of memories suddenly demanding re-examination. And when he shows up at your door, then I'll finally get to see exactly what kind of man I raised." Bernard was quiet for a moment. "You're ready for this?" "I've been ready for 3 decades. I hung up the phone and sat in the silence of my apartment. Somewhere across the city, my son was holding a piece of paper with an address 2 blocks from where I sat. He was putting together the pieces of a puzzle I had spent his entire life hiding. It was only a matter of time before he showed up at my door. The knock came sooner than I expected. And when it did, Drake would not be there to ask questions. He would be there to demand answers. The knock came at 9:47 p.m. 3 sharp raps that sounded exactly like a man who had run out of patience and questions he could answer alone. I set down my coffee and walked to the door. I had been expecting this since Saturday morning. Part of me had been expecting it for 30 years. Drake stood in the hallway, the fluorescent light catching the shadows under his eyes. He looked like he had not slept since the bank meeting. His tie was loose, his shirt untucked, and in his hand, crumpled like he had been gripping it for hours, was a printout from the Public Records Office. "Dad," his voice cracked on the single syllable. "Can I come in?" I stepped aside and let him pass. He walked into the apartment like a man entering a room he no longer recognized. His eyes moved across the walls, the furniture, the kitchen table where we had shared 1,000 meals. He was seeing it all differently now, not as his father's modest home, but as evidence, a crime scene of omission. "Dad," he said again, and this time the crack went deeper. "Do you know anything about Meridian Holdings? You want to know what 30 years of silence sounds like when it finally breaks? It sounds like your son's voice cracking on a question he already knows the answer to. It sounds like desperation and fear and the first tremor of a truth that is about to change everything. The address is 2 blocks from here," he continued. 2 blocks. I walked past that P.O. box on the way here. I've walked past it my entire life." He held up the printout, the paper trembling in his grip. "The loan, the lease, my entire company. It all traces back to this P.O. box, to your neighborhood, to—" He stopped, his jaw tight, his eyes searching my face for something I had not given him yet. "Dad, please, tell me I'm wrong." I looked at my son, 29 years old, built like his mother, stubborn like me. I had watched him take his first steps in this apartment. I had taught him to read at this kitchen table. I had driven him to school in a taxi that he later grew ashamed of, worked double shifts, so he could have things I never had, and kept a secret so large it had shaped every decision of my adult life. And now he stood in front of me, holding a piece of paper that had unraveled everything. That printout in his hand was shaking like a man holding evidence of his own blindness, proof that everything he thought he knew was built on ground he had never examined. He had spent 29 years assuming his father was poor, embarrassing, obsolete. He had let his fiancée plan to warehouse me in a nursing home. He had called me someone who did not understand modern business. And now the truth was 2 blocks away, waiting to destroy every assumption he had ever made. "Dad," he said, his voice barely a whisper now, "please, just tell me." I did not answer with words. I walked to the bedroom closet, the same closet I had walked to 1,000 times before, the same path I had taken in the dark of early mornings when I needed to count my blessings in silence. I reached behind the sock drawer, found the false panel, and pulled. The notebook came out in my hands. Worn leather, soft edges, pages filled with 30 years of careful record-keeping. I walked back to the kitchen slowly, giving Drake time to prepare for what was coming. Some truths deserve a moment of silence before they land. Some revelations require a breath between the question and the answer. Drake watched me approach with the notebook held against my chest. His eyes moved from my face to the leather binding to my hands, and I saw understanding begin to dawn. Not the full picture yet, but the shape of it, the size of it. "What is that?" he asked. I set the notebook on the kitchen table between us, the same table where I had taught him to count change when he was 5 years old, the same table where we had eaten breakfast for 18 years, where his mother had helped him with homework, where we had celebrated birthdays and mourned her passing, the same table where he had sat 100 times without ever asking what his father did with the quiet hours of the morning. I opened the notebook to the first page. 22 addresses stared up at both of us, written in my careful handwriting, each one annotated with purchase dates and values and tenant names, properties scattered across the South Side and beyond, buildings I had bought one at a time, paid off, maintained, and hidden from everyone except Bernard. My entire empire laid bare on a kitchen table. Drake's face went pale. His hand reached toward the page, then stopped, hovering over the evidence like he was afraid to touch it. "Sit down, son," I said quietly. "I have something to tell you." The words I had hidden for 3 decades were finally about to come out, and nothing would ever be the same. Drake picked up the first page like it might bite him. His eyes moved down the list of addresses, and I watched his CPA mind engage automatically, categorizing, sorting, calculating. His brow furrowed. His lips moved silently as he tallied numbers I had written decades ago. "Dad," he said quietly, his voice strained with something that sounded almost like pity, "how much do you owe on these?" He thought they were debts. He was looking at my empire and seeing a burden. He was preparing to bail out his father, already resenting the obligation, already calculating how to make this right. "Those aren't debts, son." His hand stopped moving. "Those are deeds." I pulled a property management statement from behind the notebook and slid it across the table. The letterhead caught the kitchen light. Meridian Holdings, LLC. Drake stared at the name. The same name that had been blocking his loan. The same name registered to a P.O. box 2 blocks from where we sat. The same name he had cursed at the cafe while I sipped my coffee and listened. The connection clicked behind his eyes. Every conversation, every delay, every mysterious obstacle suddenly reorganizing into a pattern he had never imagined. "I am Meridian Holdings," I said. 22 properties, $6.4 million. That lease you're about to lose? I set the terms. That loan you need, I could approve it with 1 phone call. Drake stood up so fast, his chair scraped against the floor. He backed away from the table like I was a stranger who had broken into his childhood home wearing his father's face. "That's not," he shook his head, "that's not possible." "It's been possible for 30 years. You drove a taxi. You wore the same jacket for a decade. Mom worked doubles at the hospital." His voice cracked on the word, and I saw the accusation forming before he spoke it. "You let Mom work doubles," he said. "You let her die tired." The words landed exactly where he meant them to land. in the soft place I had never stopped protecting. I did not defend myself. Some blows you absorb because you earned them. Your mother knew, I said quietly. She chose to work. She said it gave her purpose, kept her connected to people who needed her. The money was always there if she wanted to stop. She never wanted to stop. Drake's face twisted, caught between belief and rejection. And me? He asked. You let me struggle through college. You let me take loans. You let me think. I let you build something of your own. My voice stayed steady even as his cracked. I was afraid the money would spoil you, make you dependent, steal your ambition before you had a chance to discover it. Every sacrifice was strategic. Every hardship was designed. And standing there watching my son process the scope of my deception, I wondered for the first time if I had been protecting him or controlling him. Drake spiraled through the implications. I could see it in his eyes. Every rent check he had proudly written, every holiday he had skipped because he was too busy building his career, every time he had called me embarrassing in front of Soleil. The corduroy jacket, the 19-year-old taxi, the apartment he stopped visiting because it reminded him of everything he thought he had escaped. He was not the successful son who had pulled himself up from poverty. He was the blind son who had missed everything. Why now? He asked finally. Why tell me now? The question I had been waiting for. Because you're about to marry someone who only loves your potential, I said, and I needed you to know the truth before you made that mistake. What truth? You're not broke. You've never been broke. Neither am I. I let that settle. Which means Soleil's reasons for wanting you, for wanting to put me away in a nursing home, deserve another look. Drake's face went pale. The nursing home. Room 114. The plan she had made without telling him, the facility she had toured while he ignored my calls. I expected him to storm out. I expected rage or denial or the slamming of a door that would echo through 30 years of silence. Instead, he sat back down. He picked up the notebook. He turned to the second page, then the third. His CPA eyes moved across the income statements, the purchase dates, the maintenance records. He read every entry I had made for 3 decades, silently, methodically, like a man auditing a company he had just discovered he owned shares in. Hours passed. The coffee went cold. The night deepened outside the windows. And still Drake read, turning pages with the careful precision of a man who was not processing emotion but information. 3 hours later, he closed the notebook. He looked at me with an expression I had never seen. Not anger, not gratitude, not forgiveness. It was the look of a man recalculating every memory he had ever made, every assumption, every judgment. I need to make a phone call, he said. To Soleil? Not yet. He pulled out his phone, and I watched him scroll to a name I recognized. First, I need to verify something. He pressed dial and lifted the phone to his ear. Bernard, he said, it's Drake Caldwell. We need to talk about my father. The elevator doors opened onto the 14th floor, and my son walked ahead of me like a man approaching his own execution. Bernard had confirmed everything the night before. Every property, every dollar, every year of carefully maintained secrecy. Drake had listened in silence, asked 3 questions, and hung up without saying goodbye. Now we were here, father and son, walking into the office I secretly owned, to confront the woman who had tried to put me away. Soleil saw us coming through the glass conference room. Her smile faltered the moment she registered that I was with Drake, that we were walking together, that something had fundamentally changed. Mr. Caldwell, she said as we entered, I didn't expect both of you. Sit down, Soleil, Drake said. His voice was flat, controlled. The voice of a man who had spent all night processing information and had arrived at a conclusion. We're going to have a conversation about nursing homes. Her face went pale. She sat. I remained standing, letting the silence build. Through the conference room windows, the Chicago skyline stretched gray and indifferent. You visited Lakeside Elder Care 3 weeks ago, I said quietly. "You toured a private room. You asked about long-term care rates and dietary accommodations." "That's not—" her voice caught. "I was just exploring options." "You told them I had no significant assets. You described me as independent, but declining." I pulled the intake form from my jacket pocket and set it on the table between us. "You left your phone number as primary contact for placement." Soleil's hand trembled against the conference table, the first crack in the porcelain. "You were exploring how fast you could warehouse me," I continued. "While my son ignored my calls for 5 days, you were picking out which room I would spend my last years in." "It wasn't like that." Her voice had lost its polish. "You don't understand." "Then help me understand." She looked at Drake, searching for support. He gave her nothing, just the cold, steady gaze of a CPA who had finally seen the books and found them fraudulent. "He lied to you," she said suddenly, pointing at me. "He's been lying to you your entire life. Millions of dollars hidden while you struggled, while your mother worked herself into an early grave, and I'm the villain?" "You tried to put my father in a nursing home without telling me," Drake said quietly. "You toured facilities. You made plans. You decided he was a burden. Because I was trying to protect us. From what?" The question hung in the air. Soleil's composure cracked further, and beneath the polish, I saw something I had not expected. Not calculation, but fear. Raw, trembling fear. "From what happened to my family?" she whispered. "How do you hate someone who has already hated themselves for a decade?" The question formed in my mind as I watched Soleil unravel, and I realized I was witnessing something more complicated than simple greed. "What happened to your family?" I asked. She closed her eyes. When she opened them, the sharp, ambitious woman I had met at the launch party was gone. In her place sat someone younger, someone wounded. "When I was 19, my father trusted an investor," she said. "A man who came to our house, ate at our table, promised to protect our savings. 6 months later, we lost everything. The house, the retirement accounts, my parents' marriage." Her voice broke. "My mother counted quarters for groceries while the man who robbed us bought a beach house in Florida." Drake's expression shifted, not softening exactly, but changing. "I decided I would never be blindsided again," Soleil continued. "I would control every variable, every asset, every risk." She looked at me with something that might have been shame. I didn't know that made me the monster. 19 years old, watching her mother count quarters for groceries, building walls so high she forgot there were people on the other side. I understood it. I did not forgive it, but I understood it. "Trauma doesn't excuse cruelty," I said quietly, "but it explains it." Soleil wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. "The investor who destroyed us operated through a company. I've never forgotten the name." She laughed bitterly. "When I saw Meridian Holdings on Drake's loan documents, I almost panicked. One letter different. One letter." "What was the name?" Drake asked. "Meridian Trust." The words hit me like ice water. Meridian Trust. Meridian Holdings. One letter apart. I felt Drake's eyes shift to me. The same calculating look he had worn all night. The same question forming behind his expression that was now forming in my own mind. "Dad," he said slowly, "is there any connection?" "No," I said. "I've never heard of Meridian Trust." But even as I spoke, something stirred in my memory. A name Bernard had mentioned years ago. A company I had nearly partnered with before deciding the terms were too aggressive. A deal I had walked away from without asking enough questions. Meridian Trust, one letter different. The coincidence hung in the air like an accusation I could not yet answer. Soleil watched me carefully, and I saw the question in her eyes, the same question Drake was silently asking. Was I connected to the company that destroyed her family? Or was this the cruelest coincidence imaginable? I pulled out my phone and called Bernard before anyone could speak another word. The Meridian Trust question needed an answer, and I was not going to let suspicion fester in that room. Bernard picked up on the second ring. "Meridian Trust," I said without preamble. "The fraud case. Florida, 2007. Any connection to my holdings?" I put the phone on speaker and set it on the conference table. Drake and Soleil both stared at it like it might explode. Meridian Trust was a Ponzi operation run out of Tampa, Bernard's voice came through clearly. Shut down by the SEC in 2007. Principal went to federal prison. Your company, Meridian Holdings, was incorporated in Illinois in 2003. Different state, different structure, different people. He paused. The name similarity is a coincidence, Vernon. A painful one, apparently. But you're clean. Thank you, Bernard. I ended the call and looked at Soleil. The accusation in her eyes had faded, replaced by something more complicated. Embarrassment, maybe, or the uncomfortable recognition that she had been looking for a villain and found only coincidence. Satisfied? I asked. She nodded slowly. Good. I stood up from the table. Now that we've established I'm not the villain in anyone's story, let's discuss the future. I walked to the window overlooking Lincoln Park. The city stretched out below us, gray and cold and indifferent to the drama unfolding on the 14th floor. 67 years of silence, and now my voice filled every corner of the room. Every word I spoke carried the weight of 3 decades of patience, of careful building, of watching my son grow into a man who was ashamed of where he came from. I turned to face them with my back to the city. I have 3 conditions, I said. Non-negotiable. You accept all 3 or the loan stays blocked and the lease terminates in 60 days. Drake's jaw tightened. Soleil's hands folded in her lap. Condition 1, I continued. I exist publicly. Your clients, your investors, your colleagues. They know your father funded this firm. No more he drives a taxi dismissals. No more erasure. My name goes on the founding documents where it belongs. Dad, I'm not finished. I held up a second finger. Condition 2. My care decisions involve me. No nursing home discussions happen without my presence and my consent. I decide where I live, when I move, and how I spend my remaining years. Not intake coordinators, not fiancés with spreadsheets. Me. Soleil's face went red, but she did not speak. Condition 3. I let the silence stretch. Family dinners. First Sunday of every month. You both show up at my apartment. You eat what I cook, and we talk like a family. Miss a dinner without a genuine emergency, and the lease does not renew. You wanted a father you could forget. Those days are over. Drake stood up, his chair scraping against the floor. This is blackmail. This is consequence, I said. You spent 3 weeks ignoring my calls while your fiancée toured nursing homes. You let her call me a burden to my face. You built your entire business on my foundation and never once asked who poured it. I stepped closer. These conditions are not blackmail. They're the bare minimum of what a father deserves from a son who forgot he existed. The room was silent. Drake's hands were shaking. Not with anger, I realized, but with something closer to shame. You have until 5 p.m. tomorrow, I said. All 3 conditions or nothing. The loan stays frozen. The lease terminates. Your firm closes before it opens. Dad, that's not... It's exactly fair, I cut him off. It's more than fair. It's mercy you haven't earned. Drake looked at Soleil, searching for support, for argument, for anything that would let him negotiate his way out of this corner. I accept, Soleil's voice, not Drake's. She stood up slowly, her eyes meeting mine with something I had not seen before. Not defiance, not calculation, but respect. All 3 conditions, she said. The public acknowledgement, the care decisions, the dinners. She glanced at Drake. I accept. Drake stared at her like he had never seen her before. Why? He asked. You don't even like him. Soleil was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke, she looked at me, not him. Because I know what it costs to lose a father, she said. Even one you don't deserve. My father never recovered from what happened to us. He died 3 years ago, still ashamed, still broken. Her voice caught. I spent so long trying to protect myself that I forgot what I was protecting myself from. I don't want Drake to make the same mistake. The confession hung in the air. Drake's expression shifted from confusion to something softer. Not forgiveness, not yet, but the first stirring of understanding. You accept because you know I'm right, I said quietly. I accept Because I know what happens when you wait too long to fix things. She held my gaze. And because trauma doesn't excuse cruelty. You said that. You were right. I nodded slowly. Drake looked between us. His father and his fiancée suddenly allied in ways he had not anticipated. Fine, he said finally. I accept too. The conditions were set. The terms were agreed. And for the first time in weeks, I felt something like hope. The banker's pen hovered over the signature line, waiting for a name that had never appeared on documents this large. Soleil's acceptance the day before had changed everything. The alliance I never expected had become the foundation for what happened next. Vernon Caldwell, the taxi driver, walking into the Loop Bank to restore the loan his son desperately needed. Conrad Ashford processed the paperwork with professional neutrality, but I caught the subtle shift in his demeanor when he reviewed the asset verification. The man who had delivered the suspension notice now treated me with the careful deference banks reserve for their most significant clients. "Mr. Caldwell," he said, sliding documents across his desk, "I'll need your signature here, here, and here as guarantor." Drake sat beside me, watching my hand move across the pages. The same handwriting from birthday cards and permission slips, now authorizing hundreds of thousands of dollars. "Meridian Holdings shows 22 properties," Conrad continued, "valued at $6.4 million. That's substantial collateral." "Sufficient, I hope," I said. "More than sufficient, sir." I signed the final page and set down the pen. The loan was restored. The lease was secured. My son's business would survive. Drake watched me with an expression I could not quite read. Not gratitude, not resentment, but something in between. The same hands that had changed his diapers had just guaranteed more money than he had made in 5 years of building his career. We walked out of the bank together, the January wind cutting through my jacket as we stepped onto LaSalle Street. The Loop stretched around us, glass towers reflecting the winter sky. "You could buy a new jacket now," Drake said quietly. "People know." I looked down at the worn corduroy, the frayed cuffs, the coffee stain I had never bothered to remove. "I like this jacket," I said. "Your mother picked it out." Drake was silent for a moment. Then he nodded slowly, and I saw something shift behind his eyes. Not forgiveness, not yet, but the first crack in the wall he had built between us. "She would have wanted to be here," he said. "She is here." I touched the jacket collar. "Every time I wear this, she's here." We stood on the sidewalk, two men who had spent 30 years misunderstanding each other, finally beginning to see. 3 days later, Drake called a staff meeting at the Lincoln Park office. I waited outside the conference room, listening to the murmur of employees gathering inside. Through the glass, I could see Soleil standing near the back, her expression carefully neutral. She caught my eye and nodded once, a small acknowledgement of the alliance we had formed. "Before we start," Drake's voice carried through the door, "there's someone I should have introduced years ago." He opened the conference room door and gestured for me to enter. I walked into a room full of strangers, young professionals in sharp suits, analysts with laptops, administrators with clipboards. Every face turned toward me, taking in the worn jacket, the weathered hands, the 67 years written in the lines around my eyes. "My mother should have been here. She should have seen this." "This is my father," Drake said. His voice was steady, though I heard the effort it cost him. "Vernon Caldwell, founding investor of this company. The reason Caldwell and Mercer exists." The room was silent. I saw confusion on some faces, calculation on others. A founding investor who looked like a maintenance worker, a wealthy man in a poor man's clothes. "I've been here the whole time," I said quietly. "You just couldn't see me." The applause started slowly, uncertain, polite, then grew as the reality settled in. Drake's father. The money behind the business, the invisible foundation finally made visible. I shook hands with people whose names I would never remember, accepted congratulations I had not asked for, and felt the strange weight of recognition after decades of anonymity. Then a young woman approached, mid-20s, sharp eyes, a confused furrow in her brow. "Wait," she said. "You're the window guy?" The room went quiet. "Last month," she continued, My window was stuck. Building maintenance couldn't fix it for days. Then you showed up with a toolbox and had it working in 10 minutes. She stared at me. You fixed my window. And you're the founding investor? I smiled. The first real smile I had felt in weeks. I still have the toolbox, I said. Money doesn't mean you stop being useful. The confusion rippled through the room, but I saw something else emerging beneath it. Respect, maybe, or the beginning of understanding. The wealthy man who still fixed windows. The founding investor who wore the same jacket for a decade. Drake watched me with an expression I had never seen on his face before. Not shame, not calculation. Something closer to pride. That's my father, he said to the room. He owns 22 buildings across Chicago, and he still carries a toolbox. The laughter that followed was warm, genuine. The sound of people recognizing something they had not expected to find. Soleil caught my eye from across the room. She mouthed 2 words I had not anticipated. Thank you. The wounds were not healed. The trust was not rebuilt. But standing in that conference room, finally acknowledged after 30 years of silence, I felt something I had not felt in a long time. Hope. She found me in the hallway before I could leave, the woman who had tried to erase me, now blocking my path with tears in her eyes. Soleil's mouth thank you at the staff meeting had surprised me, but this was something else. She stood between me and the elevator, her composure cracked, her carefully constructed walls finally down. I need to say something, she said, before the dinner, before we pretend everything is normal. I waited. I was going to put you in a home so I wouldn't have to think about you. The words came out raw, unpolished. I saw your jacket and decided you had nothing to offer. I measured your worth in assets and found you worthless. She wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. I was wrong about everything. Yes, I said, you were. After the confrontation, I almost called off the engagement. She looked at me directly. Not because of your conditions, because I realized I'd become exactly like the people who destroyed my family, taking from others, calculating their value, discarding what didn't serve me. How do you forgive someone who saw you as furniture to be moved? You do not. Not completely, not quickly, but you can choose to leave the door open. I don't forget, I said quietly. Room 114, the intake form, the description you gave them, independent but declining. I let the words settle. Those things happened. I won't pretend they didn't. I know, but I can learn to trust again if you give me reasons to. She nodded slowly, her tears still falling. What do you need from me? I don't need perfection, Soleil. I need honesty. I need you to see me as a person, not a problem. I need you to show up, not because you have to, but because you want to. I can do that. We'll see. It was not forgiveness. It was not absolution. But it was a beginning. The first Sunday came faster than I expected. I spent the morning preparing my apartment for guests it had not seen in years. I swept floors, washed windows, and dug out the good dishes Eleanor had insisted we keep for special occasions. Then I started cooking. Her recipe. The one she had made every Sunday when Drake was young. Chicken with rosemary and lemon, roasted potatoes, green beans from the can, because she said fresh ones were overrated. I had not made it since she died. The smell of her cooking filled the apartment. For a moment she was alive again, standing at the stove, humming something I could not quite remember, telling me to set an extra place just in case someone stopped by. Your mother would have set an extra place, I said to the empty kitchen, just in case. I set the table for 3. They arrived together at 6. Drake in a button-down shirt, Soleil in something simpler than I had ever seen her wear. They stood in the doorway of the apartment like strangers entering a museum, taking in the small kitchen, the worn furniture, the life I had lived while they built theirs in Lincoln Park. It smells amazing, Drake said. Your mother's recipe. Something flickered across his face. Memory, maybe, or grief. He nodded and stepped inside. We ate in awkward silence at first, the clink of forks filling the spaces where conversation should have been. But then Drake looked up from his plate. "The building on Ashland," he said. "How did you find it?" I set down my fork. "What do you mean?" "The first property. How did you know it was worth buying?" I pulled the notebook from its place on the counter and set it on the table between us. The same notebook that had started everything. "Your grandfather showed me how to spot value where others saw decay," I said. "He never had money to invest himself, but he taught me to look for bones. Good bones hold up a building even when the paint is peeling." Drake leaned forward, and Soleil moved her chair closer to see. The three of us bent over 22 addresses, and I found myself explaining things I had never told anyone. How I had found each property, what repairs it needed, which tenants had become like family. Three people at a kitchen table building something from wreckage. The awkwardness faded as the evening went on. Drake asked questions, real questions, the kind that showed he was listening. Soleil offered observations about market trends, her sharp mind finally directed at something other than calculation. When the dishes were cleared and the coffee was poured, Drake looked at me across the table. "Teach me," he said. I blinked. "What?" "Not just the addresses, the whole thing." He pointed at the notebook. "How you built this, how you hid it, why you waited." He paused. "I want to understand, not just inherit. Understand." I looked at my son across the table, and for the first time in 20 years, he was asking to learn from me. Not as an obligation, not as a condition, because he wanted to know his father. "It'll take time," I said. "I have time." I closed the notebook and smiled. "Then we start next Sunday." Bernard spread the new documents across his desk, and for the first time in 40 years, I was writing my son back into my future. The Sunday dinners had continued through February. Drake showed up every week, Soleil beside him, both of them asking questions I had waited decades to answer. The lessons had begun, not just about property, but about patience, about building things that last. Now it was time to make it official. 5 years, I said, pointing to the transfer clause Bernard had drafted. Gradual ownership, 20% per year, if he shows up. Bernard raised his eyebrows. "You know, when you came to me in December, you were planning to leave everything to the community foundation, every property, every dollar. That was before the dinner, before he asked to learn." Bernard nodded slowly, his pen hovering over the witness line. "And if he doesn't keep showing up, then the properties go to charity anyway, his choice. 20% per year, trust measured out like medicine. Too much, too fast could kill the patient, but too little would starve the relationship we were finally building." I signed every page Bernard placed in front of me. The will was restructured. The transfer was conditional. My son's inheritance depended not on my death but on his presence. "It's a good plan," Bernard said when we finished. "Your father would have approved." "My father never had anything to leave. He left you something more important. He taught you how to see value where others saw nothing." Bernard smiled. "Now you're teaching Drake the same thing." The weeks passed quickly after that. Drake and Soleil threw themselves into preparing the second branch, a building on West Chicago Avenue that I had purchased 15 years earlier. I watched the renovation from a distance at first, then closer as Drake began asking for advice. "You've owned this building since I was in middle school," he said one afternoon, standing in what would become the main office. "I bought it the year you got your CPA license," I said. "I was planning ahead." He stared at me for a long moment. "You were always planning ahead. I just couldn't see it." "You weren't supposed to, not yet." My name on the building, my son's name on the door, 40 years of patience arriving all at once. The opening was scheduled for the first Saturday in March. I arrived wearing the same corduroy jacket, pressed now, the coffee stain finally removed, but otherwise unchanged. Drake met me at the entrance, his hand extended. "You sure you want to speak?" he asked. "I can do the introduction alone." "I've been silent for 30 years, I said. "I have a few things to say." He led me through the crowd, clients, staff, investors, Bernard watching from the back with a whiskey in his hand. Soleil stood near the podium, her expression unreadable but her eyes warm. Drake stepped to the microphone first. "Before we begin," he said, "I want to introduce someone. Most of you met him at the Lincoln Park office last month. Some of you know him as the founding investor. A few of you know him as the guy who fixes stuck windows. Light laughter rippled through the room. I know him as my father, Vernon Caldwell. The applause was genuine this time. I walked to the podium and looked out at the faces before me. Strangers, mostly, but also Bernard, also Drake, also Soleil. The people who knew what this moment meant. Real foundations aren't made of concrete, I said. They're made of the people who stay when staying is hard. The room was quiet. I spent 30 years building something in silence. I thought I was protecting my son. Maybe I was. Maybe I was also protecting myself. I paused. But foundations only matter if someone builds on them. And I'm grateful, more grateful than I know how to say, that my son decided to build. I looked at Drake, standing beside the podium, his eyes bright. You stayed, I told the room. That's the only thing that matters. The applause that followed was longer than I deserved. But I let it wash over me, feeling for the first time that the silence had been worth it. Afterward, as the crowd dispersed and champagne was poured, a woman approached me. She was in her 60s, silver-haired, with the kind of face that had seen both hardship and survival. Ruth Harwell. She had lived in my Ashland Avenue building for 20 years. I recognized her immediately. "Mr. Caldwell," she said quietly, touching my sleeve, "I never knew it was you." Knew what? The checks, the rent forgiveness. All those years when my husband was sick, when I couldn't make the payments. Her eyes filled with tears. The notices always said Meridian Holdings. I never knew there was a person behind the name. I had reduced her rent 3 times over the years, covered her husband's final months entirely. I had never told anyone. I should have known, she said. Only someone who understood hunger would feed people so quietly. I did not know what to say. So I simply nodded, and she squeezed my hand before disappearing into the crowd. Drake appeared beside me, watching her go. "Who was that?" he asked. "Someone I helped," I said, "a long time ago." He looked at me with something I had not seen before. Not shame, not calculation. Pride. The morning after my speech, I was back behind the wheel. Same taxi, same routes, same corduroy jacket with the coffee stain back on the sleeve. Drake's pride had stayed with me through the night. The way he looked at me after Ruth Harwell walked away, not as the embarrassing father, not as the secret millionaire, but as someone worth knowing. It was the look I had waited 30 years to see. But this morning I was just Vernon again. And that was exactly how I wanted it. I pulled the Crown Victoria onto 18th Street and began my route. The city looked the same as it always had. Gray buildings, busy sidewalks, people rushing toward destinations they thought mattered. But I saw it differently now. Buildings I owned passed by the window. Properties I had purchased one at a time over decades, each one a quiet investment in a future I was only now beginning to share. I could retire tomorrow. The money was there. Bernard had shown me the numbers a dozen times. I could sell everything, buy a house in Florida, spend my remaining years doing nothing at all. But I did not want to do nothing. I wanted to drive. The taxi was not a symbol of poverty. It was a choice. It was the seat from which I had watched the city grow, learned which neighborhoods were rising, spotted value where others saw decay. Everything I had built started from behind this wheel. A young man flagged me down near the Loop, mid-20s, expensive suit, phone pressed to his ear. He climbed into the back seat without looking at me and gave an address in River North. We drove in silence for a few blocks. Then he ended his call and caught my eye in the rearview mirror. "Driving a cab your whole life," he said, not unkindly. "Must be tough just scraping by, huh?" What do you tell someone who thinks they know your whole story from your clothes? You tell them nothing. Or you tell them just enough to make them wonder. "You'd be surprised," I said, "what you can build from a driver's seat." He looked confused but did not ask more. When we reached his destination, he tipped well and disappeared into a glass tower without a backward glance. I smiled and pulled back into traffic. The notebook sat in my glove box, the same leather binding worn soft from decades of handling. I did not need to open it anymore. The addresses were memorized. The values were known. The secret had served its purpose. By evening, the city had cooled and the light was fading. I parked the taxi in its usual spot on 18th Street and walked toward my building. The stairs creaked the same way they had for 40 years, but I climbed them differently now. Lighter, somehow. The weight I had carried for 3 decades was gone. Not forgotten, but transformed. The silence had become a story. The secret had become a lesson. I unlocked my apartment and stepped inside. The same kitchen, the same table, the same view of Pilsen through the window where the streetlight turned the evening orange. Everything was exactly as it had been the morning this all started. The morning I had counted addresses and wondered if my son would ever know who I really was. Now he knew, and knowing had not destroyed him. It had made him curious. It had made him present. It had made him show up. I walked to the closet, reached behind the sock drawer, and pulled out the notebook one last time. 22 addresses, one son, one table, everything I had ever built finally visible. I opened to the last page and found my pen. There was one more entry to make. March 15th, 2026. Drake called to schedule dinner. His idea, not a condition, a choice. The 5-year transfer was working. The first 20% would become his in January. By then, I suspected, he would understand why I had waited so long to tell him anything at all. I closed the notebook and placed it back in the drawer. The false panel clicked into place, but it did not feel like hiding anymore. It felt like storing something precious until it was needed again. I sat down at the kitchen table, the same table where I had taught Drake to count change, where Eleanor had helped him with homework, where I had revealed the truth that changed everything. The chair was worn, the wood was scratched, but it was mine. Outside, the city hummed with people rushing toward something they thought mattered. Deals and deadlines and destinations that would be forgotten by morning. I watched the lights come on across Pilsen and realized I had nowhere else I needed to be. No more secrets to keep, no more silence to maintain, no more waiting for a son who finally knew how to find me. For the first time in 67 years, I was exactly where I belonged. The notebook was in the drawer. My son was in the city, and I was home. That was enough. That was everything. That was the foundation I had spent my whole life building. And to you listening to my story, remember this. For 43 years, I thought silence was protection. I believed hiding my fortune would shield my family from greed, from envy, from the ugliness money brings. But I was wrong. Don't make my mistake. Secrets don't protect. They divide. Every year I stayed silent. I built another wall between myself and the people I loved most. This life story taught me that trust is worth more than any building I ever owned. What began as protection became a drama story I never intended. My family story nearly turned into a revenge story. My son's resentment ran that deep. But this isn't a revenge story with villains. It's a true story about redemption. If you're holding something back from the ones you love, ask yourself why. Is it protection or fear? The Lord blessed me with a second chance, and I didn't waste it. Not every life story ends in peace, but mine did, because I chose honesty. If this true story touched you, I'd love to hear your thoughts. Drop a comment and tell me, what would you have done in my place? If you know someone who needs to hear this family story, share it with them. For more drama stories and real-life stories like this one, hit subscribe. Your support means everything. Thank you for staying until the very end. Your time means more than you know. A quick reminder, while the heart of this true story is real, some details have been adjusted for storytelling. The lesson is what matters most. Take care of yourselves and take care of each other.